What next? Would anyone like to ask a question? Yeah. Do we have mics or not? Oh, we're doing that thing. Okay. You want people to go back there? Is that? We're trying a new thing. You have to go back there. It's a little bit like confessing. Nobody will look at you while you're talking. State your name, please.
Is this okay? I was wondering if you could talk a little about knowing the difference between how, I guess, God wants or how we're supposed to serve versus how we think we should serve.
Okay. I guess you can come sit down. I've worked out the logistics of this shit. I think that's a very important question, and one that I think is always presents some possibility for confusion. And I think there's a few things that you can think about. I think you have to kind of take the helicopter up a little bit and look at it from that perspective, which is that if we understand that God, Shiva, whomever, how we want to make that, name that, if you will, that the will of God is to express freedom, to express the joy of its own completeness, and to express that, which is exactly why we're all sitting here, why anybody's sitting anywhere on this planet and any other planet in any part of the cosmos. That all manifestation is in fact the will, if you will, the intent to express fullness. So I think one of the barometers you could perhaps use is, okay, before I say that, that is a fullness that's complete in itself. That's not dependent on anything outside of itself for that experience, for that absolute oneness within pure consciousness. So as it expresses that itself, as it expresses that will and the joy of its own being, it's never losing sight of its own fullness. It's expressing that because of that fullness, if you will. That will, as it is expressed and therefore misunderstood within us as individuals, turns into desire or need. You can think of it like that. That sense of fullness, that sense of completeness, somehow is not our experience. There's an experience, if you will, of incompleteness. And therefore we have some sense of, I need something, right? I need something in order to simply feel that joy in my life. Or I need something to go away so that I could feel that joy, right? So the question that you can ask yourself is, what is driving the action? What is driving what we want to do, right? Is it being driven by some hunger that can't be satisfied, right? Because if we've moved from that place, we're reinforcing the very experience. If we act out of that sense of incompleteness, then our intention to reach outside of ourselves in order to find that completion fundamentally reinforces the very expensive that I need something and I gotta go get it. So it's a self-reinforcing experience. And this is what we do, right? I think you can understand your own intent, your own will, and use that as the, if you will, the question in yourself is, when we reach for something, where are we reaching from? Are we reaching to express the fullness of our life? Or are we somehow trying to fill up some sense of non-fullness, right? My suggestion is that if you can get quiet enough, before we decide what we want to do, what we think we should be doing, is get really quiet inside and ask that question, where is this coming from, right? Because then we're able to distinguish and perhaps then say, okay, I really don't need that, and therefore I shouldn't be projecting myself into that. There's a very subtle discussion or thing we need to understand, and that is the difference between need and just expressing that freedom, expressing that fullness, right? Sometimes, you know, terminology gets in the way. I often say, you want anything, I want everything, right? Why shouldn't you, right? But want that in terms of the expressing of a fullness that you've already found in yourself, and then you're infusing that fullness in whatever you do. And if you're infusing that fullness in whatever you do, then you are serving God's will, because it's the expression of that fullness, right? I think the conundrum comes when even if we haven't asked the question, or particularly when we have, and we say, oh, that's what I really should be doing, but I don't really ought to do that, right? That's not going to get me what I think I need, right? And then you perhaps have to come to a place of surrender in yourself, a place where you're willing to surrender the acting from incompleteness, so that that fullness that's trying to express itself through you can do so. So because we have this inherent within consciousness, therefore inherent within us, the self-reflective capacity to really know our state, then that's the gift. The question is, you have to see what your state is before you start projecting and reaching and demanding, etc. Is that helpful at all? Right. Because my point is that there's no reason that we shouldn't express that fullness and celebrate that fullness, and we can choose what's expressing that fullness, as long as it's not coming from a place of incompleteness in us, and as long as it's doing no harm to somebody else, right? As long as it's not mowing down everybody around us in order to say, boy, look how great I am, what I'm doing for, giving everybody, right? Giving them bags of poison instead of, a flower, right? Does that make sense? Right. I think the important thing is be willing to ask the simple question: whose will is this? So I would suggest to you also that in order to have the strength to hear that answer, perhaps we have to start from the place of thy will be done. We have to start from the place that says that I want to serve God's will, right? Because then it's a whole different platform from which we're functioning, right? And a whole different platform from a place from which we ask that question. So the whole point of making a commitment to our sadhana, to make a commitment is to, as we discussed in the last retreat, be really clear what it is that you really want out of this life. Right? What is it that you're trying to have, so that whatever you have at the end of your life is what's truly meaningful, instead of everything that we chase throughout our life, and then right before the plug is pulled, we say, holy shit, look at all those things I chased, right? And look where it got me, right? I think it takes a lot of stillness, if you will, and a lot of courage and strength to have that stillness and to truly ask ourselves, who are we serving? I remember once sitting with Rudy, maybe a year into my relationship, and I got to New York and I was all Mr. Hot Snot about all the work I had done, right, for the last, month or so before I saw him, and everything that I had accomplished, and more students and yada, yada, right? And so I started talking to him, and he says, who are you serving? Well, everything that I had done was really serving me, right? I'll be a bigger teacher, I'll have more students, I'll have a bigger ashram, all the different things, right? Which didn't inherently make them bad, but I hadn't really stopped to ask the question, who am I serving? Right? Ask the question. You can also flip that in the sense that you decide you want to do something, right? Ask the question, in doing this, who am I serving, right? And just as importantly, will it really serve my own freedom? God has given you this life to experience unconditional joy and freedom. If you accept that position, then why shouldn't you be able to do anything you wanted in that sense, right? So then if you are holding on to that awareness, you've got that bob, that resonance in yourself, that's really what you're trying to do, is to live that fullness. Then most time the question doesn't come up, right? Yes, please. Okay, this is not a good plan.
Talking about Rudy saying, "Who are you serving?" There are a number of quotes by him saying, "I need the energy of all the students around me in order for me to grow." And of course, it's a circular thing because he can only serve people as he got bigger. But he seemed to also seem to be, "I need your energy in order to help me grow." So,
Well, because that was, if you will, he felt he had to continually grow in order to serve God. So then there wasn't any conflict between wanting to. So, and what was when he says, "When I need all your energy"? Well, all he got was tension, right? Right. Right. So but that was the point. Rudy had one fundamental clarity about what his life was about, and that was to serve God. And he knew that he had to grow beyond himself. Seemed like every day he had to grow beyond himself, right? In order to feel that he was serving the highest in himself. I don't think that Rudy would have probably, if we looked at his diary, I don't think he would have said, "Oh boy, I just received so much joy and light today." I think the question probably at the end of every entry is, "Where's the Alka-Seltzer?" I got indigestion. I think pretty much any decision we want to make, if we ask that question, is who is this really serving? Will this serve the true purpose of my life? Will this bring me to that liberation, which in itself is the highest expression of our serving God's will? The highest expression of serving God's will is for us to allow that liberation to reveal itself in us. That's the whole fundamental understanding of Shaktipat, the descent of grace, the decision for God to say, "Know thyself as me, be free," right? And I think another way of kind of answering our own question is, are we miserable trying to get something that we think we need? I need this to be happy, and I'm really miserable trying to get it. And I think, in one sense, it takes a long time to come to that place in our spiritual practice that what we should be doing really is working from that place of joy. Well, that's why we have somebody to perhaps suggest to us to stop working from all the nonsense and work from that joy, express that joy, express that freedom and that unconditionality. And then the question of, am I serving God, or in this decision that I'm making, who am I serving, doesn't come up. You might even say that until you come to that place in yourself where you're clearly asking that question, or you not even have to ask the question, you are clear that you live in the unwavering devotion to God, that perhaps all the decisions we make up to that moment is suspect. That's why we've been given the capacity to be aware. Conscious is conscious. It's not unconscious, right? Anybody else?
I'll just I just want to kind of add to that, to the discussion, and my sense is that the ego is such a trickster that it creates these constant situations of lack, the feeling of lack. And so it almost feels like, okay, I need to ask that question like 10 times a day. You know, where,
Sure, of course.
you know,
Yeah.
where's this coming from? You know,
Well, thank you. That's kind of another way of saying what we're saying, because that lack is, look, the ego in us, its only experience is experience of misunderstanding. Let's get this through our heads right now. The only thing the ego can do is misunderstand, because it's perpetually trying to define itself in relationship to something outside of itself. It's going to get it wrong every time. So then, but you're correct. You can ask the question: is this my ego that is doing this? I suggest close your eyes. Say to God, may my will be thy will. And then there's automatically a mirror that you're holding up to every action that you're about to take, to every need that shows up. Because every itch we get, we don't need to scratch. In fact, we know what happens when you scratch an itch. You just got to keep scratching because it doesn't stop it. I think we'll stop then. Thank you all for coming.